Reflections on Cascadian Zen. These reflections are not intended to be all-encompassing, merely two little essays in the literal sense, namely attempts or endeavors, the Middle French essay, trial, attempt, to essay we can still say, in turn from the Latin, weighing or ascertaining. So, what do I here endeavor to ascertain? That's what an essay does. Just tries to weigh something. However, non-exclusively and with as much latitude as possible. Well, the issue at hand. What is Cascadian Zen? How to bring this word to mind? How do we get it to appear in thinking? So essay 1 for Cascadian Zen. So essay 1, Zen. By Zen, I do not think that we mean that the front gate to Cascadia exclusively goes through the formal practice of Zazen. That would be a very un-Zen thing to say, and mean-spirited at that. It could, of course, mean any Buddhist practice. For example, Daphne Marlatt's Vajrayana practice. But it does not have to be Buddhist. Many of the world's spiritual practices have valuable resources to open one beyond holding the world hostage to the needs, reference points, neuroses, obfuscations, and grasping of the ego. In the second or later and extended version of Dogen's Shin Fukutoku, Ungraspable Mind, from 1241, and Shinness, it's mind, but not just mind, in the broadest possible sense, your heart, your affective, the full depth of consciousness itself. Has this to say about the issue of Zen and how to study it and how to approach it. And it's important to remember at this time that he's giving this talk to his Sangha that includes a new member, Itatsu. Itatsu, normally he's berating everyone for not studying anything at all, just think, oh, let's do Zazen, is all I need to do. Dogen's like, no, study. And he had a little study center right next to the Zendo. But this time, Itatsu, who's a Lotus Sutra scholar, has joined. So he reverses tactics. And he's going after him. This is the one he's after. What then does it mean to study something like Cascadia? You know, it's a very important word for Dogen. Probably the most famous passage in all of Japanese Zen literature, at least from the Soto tradition, the Genjo Koan. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. And that word study is not some little bit of poetic license. It's just the everyday word still in Japanese today for study, gaku. For example, tetsugaku, the word for philosophy. And Dogen would use phrases throughout the Shobogenzo like gengaku, deep study, or even zetsugaku, going beyond and cutting off study, going through study to break through study, not going around study. After telling the tale of Diamond King Chu, the competitive and self-congratulatory scholar of the Diamond Sutra, who cannot answer the simple question of an elderly rice cake vendor, Dogen then turns to the story of the confrontation in the Tang Dynasty between the Tripitaka master from India, Daer, and the national teacher, Huizhang, who the Japanese call Eichu. Daer, from Da, large, and Er, ears, daini in Japanese, not only had large ears, and that's significant because scholars, of course, they're in the Mahayana tradition, the Shravakas, the auditors, the ones who just hear, the ones who just learn, the ones who can repeat, the ones who said, oh, I heard so-and-so say this and so say that. So the great scholars, and that's what he is, big ears, giant Shravaka, not only had large ears, and not only was a scholar master of all matters to do with the Tripitaka, the three baskets, comprise, as you all know, of the writings on monastic conduct, so the Vinaya, the Sutras, and Abhidharma metaphysics that we now call the Pali Canon. So he knew that. Of course, it's so large, huge, so my shelf is like this big. But also, to boot, his practice and studies had endowed him with a magical power. That's scholarship. So people don't tell you that when you're, fighting tooth and nail in the jungle of the academy to get tenure. If you're a master, you get a magic power. And what was his magic power? Big Ear's magic power. He was telepathic. He could read or see minds. He could penetrate your mind. Now that's very interesting from a Zen perspective. And so when Dara comes to Xi'an, what's now Xi'an, the Chang'an, the ancient Chinese capital, the emperor says, Wei Chang, you've got to test this dude out. I mean, he's coming here saying he's a magician. And so after asking a halting Dyer if he really had the power, now first ask him directly, can you do this? And Dyer says, yeah, sure, no big deal. I'm a Tripitaka master. It's the least of my powers. I can read your mind. It just comes along with the territory of being so awesome. And Wei Chang's just listening. Wei Chang's really old. Wei Chang, he's just the old. He just says, tell me where this old monk is. Dara responded, I guess that means, I see. First of all, it's strange. Tell me where you're standing right next to me. So it's got to be a trick. He picks that up, and I'll see where his mind really is. That's what I'll do. He's testing whether I can really read his mind. So I'll see where his mind really is. Wei Chang, you are the teacher of the nation. You are the great Chinese master of the Tang Dynasty. Why are you in the West River enjoying the racing boats? Tripitaka Master is implying that Wei Chang's mind, as the teacher of the nation, should be on proper Buddhist thoughts and values. Racing boats implies that his mind is playing, occupied with trivial toys. Zen, go back to the lead, to the stuff, to the good stuff, when he should be thinking only about the letter of Buddhist doctrine. Wei Chang paused, then came right back at Dyer. Tell me where I am, now. Dyer again responded by alleging Wei Chang's lack of focus. You are the teacher of the nation. Why are you on Tianjin Bridge watching monkeys play? Now, by the way, in Zen, that is low. That is a total burn in the Zen vocabulary. Remember the Buddha, monkey mind, right? And your mind's all over the place. You're just doing crazy stuff. You're not on target. You're not on task. You're not following the rules. No, we weren't told to talk like this. Wei Chang just says, he's relentless. Tell me where I am. Dar's like, this is not going well. I guess it's not working. He tried and tried, but could not see where Wei Chang was, even though it is clear that Wei Chang is right in front of him. Yet he looked for Wei Chang's mind by looking for what he guessed were its errant contents. Wei Chang then screamed his verdict. You are possessed by the spirit of the wild fox. You don't have the power of seeing others' minds. It's a really deep answer, by the way. Wild fox. Dogen knew and esteemed the second case of the Mumonkan, where the wild fox is a monk possessed by the intellectual belief that an awakened person is not subject to causes and conditions. Thinking this, the hapless monk was turned into a wild fox who spent generation after generation, life after life, seeking again and again to locate the intellectual answer that would bring him back to his human form. That's weird too. I mean, what kind of fox is that? Doesn't want to be a fox. That's the first clue. That's like, this is a bad fox. The entire time, man. Why do I have to be a fox? Yeah, that's only. Well, anyway. And so he's going to try to find what's the answer. What do I have to have in my mind to get back to what I lost? Being a human being who somehow had the belief that were I to be awake, I would be free from causes and conditions. After many generations spent as a wild fox, finally the monk became free from his form when his mind deepened enough for him to be free for his form. He was free when he realized there's nothing wrong with being a fox. Let a fox be a fox. He awoke to the causes and conditions by which, if now I am a fox, then happily I am a fox. These are the causes and conditions, or as he would now say, the bioregionally specific ecological conditions whose background interdependence makes possible the coming forth of the fox. No karma, no nothing. You know, it's like being a lion with no food, no habitat, no air, no water. What kind of lion would you be? You can't be anything without the karmic conditions that endow us in each moment with whatever it is they endow us with. Dyer, on the other hand, was still a hapless wild fox, looking for the magic words and powers to free himself from himself. Now, Dogen always would put it like this. This stance of human life, that's like running around going, where's my head? I can't find my head. Who hid my head? And as such, it was he who was, Dogen now tells us, it was Dyer who was wastefully fooling with racing boats and playing with monkeys. It was Dyer's mind that was elsewhere. But this ascertained by Wei Chang, penetrating Dyer's mind, but was not ascertained by penetrating Dyer's mind and assessing its context according to Buddhist doctrine. He didn't go around and say, does he understand what it is he's supposed to be? Does he get the idea? I mean, it was Wei Chang that looked right into Dyer's mind and saw the mind of a wild fox. You know, how does Dogen describe wild foxes? Oh yeah, I teach at a university, so he has a special name for it. We who chase after the briars and brambles of word attachment. That's what we do. We, Wild Fox University, to be honest. Dogen explains, a Buddha ancestor and a Tripitaka master are not the same. They are as far apart from each other as heaven and earth. Just you have to know from an East Asian context, that's horrible. Because heaven and earth, that is the circulation of the universe. You've separated the dharmas from their interdependent conditions. Or he continues later, the body and mind of Hui Chang are not to be understood by those who practice miraculous powers. I think that's a very key line. So Zen is not, for example, about spiritual practice as wandering around hoping for a miracle. It's to stare straight at things in their wonder and horror just as they are. What's the 10th panel of the ox herding pictures? No spells, no magic, just teach the withered trees to bloom. That's Zen. Indeed, Dogen says, Wei Chong's practice, and I quote, is never about the intention to become a Buddha. Fukan Zazengi, first thing he wrote upon returning from China. Have no mind on becoming a Buddha. Otherwise, you'll spend your entire time learning what it is, aiming for it, and chasing the briars and brambles of Buddha attachment. Well, this is, for Dogen, we call being held hostage by Buddha. The activity is dropped away, Dogen continues, from a bird cage or a fishing net. That image appears often in the Shobogenzo. Uji, for example, his famous essay on being time. You think of time, like, wow, this moment right here, I was so alive. Cascadian Zen, my horrible life, Cascadian, wow, that was it, I was alive. And then, boom, I capture it in a little bird cage, and that becomes what I am, and my mind is stuck. It's been turned, but it can no longer turn. It is not bound by a bird cage. It is not bound by a fishing net. Later, the great, who the Japanese call Joshu, the great Jiaochu, explains clearly Dair's problem. Wei Chong was on top of Dair's nostrils, so he could not see Wei Chong. Saw his nostrils. He couldn't. Not looking up his nose to see what contents in his brain. Show me your mind. Not show me what's on your mind. Show me your mind. What is it then to see another mind? A mind that Dogen, in this fascicle, characterizes thusly. The entire earth is all mind. The entire Dharma is all mind. For Dogen, the only way to communicate is mind to mind. Dogen calls that only Buddha and Buddha. The Buddha in me awakens to the Buddha in you, and we meet in mind. As we meet in mind, the ancient ones are present, human and non-human, all the universe is present, all the Buddhas to come are present, and that's why when the Buddha himself awoke, he was able to say, all are awoken, as in he awoke to mind. They're not awake to the fact that they're awake, but they're awake. So Dogen then, what then is study? He concludes, study then is beyond the intellectual reach of the ordinary and sacred. By assessing we mean good and bad. Follow these rules. No, you're a bad Buddhist. You didn't follow those rules. Study mind that is ungraspable. Essay 2. Place and time. Wei Chong's demand, I think, is the demand of Cascadian Zen. Tell me where I am now. That's the challenge. Two aspects, the where and the now. Space and time, for we briars and brambles and word attachment types. The wild thoughts of space and time. Where and now. How do we think the where and now of the entire earth is all mind? This cannot mean merely acquiring information about our place, as necessary in other contexts as that would be. If we become Cascadian Shravakas, who know the names for everything, who can talk about, shut up or hiking, don't identify every single plant, and the Latin once or twice is enough. That's all you can do. Walk through the Olympics and cite, genus and species in Latin. That's a beautiful thing on one level. But it's not Cascadian Zen, it's not Cascadia. That's not the thought of Cascadia, if that's where you start and end. It is a call to study, is a call to a study of mind, a call to a study of the entire earth. But what do we mean by study? But we do not study the whole simply as the whole. that would be, again, just another abstraction, another word attachment, the earth. No one's ever seen the earth. It's a gesture to open up your own mind. But the interdependent causes and conditions whose operations here and now comprise a bioregion. We study the earth mind, but we do so studying it bioregion by bioregion. And as we saw, by study we mean not amassing intellectual capital, but ultimately zetsugaku, going beyond and cutting off study. To understand that study is not simply to end up with the fishnets and bird cages of facts. To open up here and now, to be present here and now. It is for mind to awaken to itself, which is nothing less than the mind to awaken here and now to itself as Cascadia. It follows then that we are not on the land, but of the land. We are of Cascadia. That's where we start. Not of facts of Cascadia, we're of Cascadia. That is mind, here and now. We are a living and singular expression of the land that comprises us right here, again and again. So how do we begin to find our place? First, we have to get ourselves out of the way of place, to not reduce it to the objects that surround us and which manifest in accordance with our interests. Remember Dogen famously says, to go to the 10,000 things is delusion, to let them come to us, that is awakening. This includes the economics and politics of empire, remembering that empire, not a single one of which has ever been long-lived, so its batting average is 0.00. That these empires brutally supplanted the cultures and languages and life ways that learned to live here for the long term. These are the unceded lands of the Duwamish and other related peoples of the Coast Salish, who have been here in their own accounting from time immemorial. That is, for longer than they can remember. Empire began on this day, ended on that day. It's always the same story. You can bring it down to the time of day. And who knew full well that the long term was inseparable from a culture awakening to a sense of itself as of the land. Maps, so I'm coming to this right here, often rely on border thinking, and as such are implicated in the colonial and imperial practices that divvied up the land as the loot of the colonizers and relegated its original inhabitants to second-class subjects at best, or to slavery, displacement, and genocide at worst. But can we not learn to think of maps as not recording political borders and domains of conquest, but rather as the layers and porous boundaries of bioregions? Here, where what we are want to map politically as the United States Pacific Northwest, David McCloskey has worked for decades trying to map the bioregion of Cascadia with as many strata, each of which edges into the next as the edge relations of geological history, watersheds, indigenous culture, climate, etc., as well as the boundaries that bring Cascadia itself into relief despite its porosity. Strikingly, this map is not centered on the large population centers, Seattle, Portland, Vancouver. It disregards state borders and the territories that enclose them. This includes northwestern part of California, western Oregon, western Washington, northern Nevada, Utah, onto the Continental Divide, Grand Tetons, Yellowstone, the Alexander Archipelago, southeastern Alaska, as well as the national border between the United States and Canada. Almost all of BC is in it. If deep ecology, in its most streamlined sense, as Bill Duvall and George Sessions have claimed, is the task of extending the interrelations that comprise a bioregion as discerned in the science of ecology to include non-scientific questions. Like, for example, what manners of habitation, politics, and economics are best suited to a particular bioregion? Then another remarkable feature of McCloskey's map comes into view. Rather than impose political borders upon the land, the map inverts. We might even say revolutionizes, in a literal sense, turns around our thinking. The many edges that dynamically and porously and even culturally give rise to the bioregion give rise to the bioregional map, which then becomes the edges out of which sustainable and ethical politics and economics can arise. The global crises of economic inequality and ecological catastrophe are not only intertwined at the root, but they demonstrate that our maps are ruinously upside down. We map on our economics to the earth. We map on our politics to the earth. Giving testimony to what in the wild fox world Hegel called the verkehrte Welt, the upside down world. It's just a set right side up, but we all have learned first upside down to stop our upside down world. Another clue to this sense of space is what Japanese philosopher Watsuji Tetsuro retrieved as this seemingly innocent little word in Japanese, fudo, a term comprised of two kanji, fu, literally wind, but like many things in Japanese, that's just a little suggestion, that just kind of opens things up, but really connoting the inexpressible qualities, the customs, the cultural practices, the ways of being in a place, and then the word for land, do. The term has variously been translated as climate or milieu. I think that is not going to help us at all. But what Tsuji does is allows this term, the inexpressible sense of what it is to be here and now, he traces it back all the way into the Taoist tradition, and the word, what the Mahayana calls Shizen, what the Taoists call Ziran, this ancient word for nature. Ziran, those same kanji are now used as, in natural science, it's the word for nature and natural science, so they've been totally lost, but tries to turn them right side up and remember that for the Taoists and for Mahayana, Ziran, so of its own, to be like itself, but spontaneously manifesting near, now and here. It is attuned to the place-specific, self-occurring regimes of mutual emergence, much as we now understand them within the dynamics of bioregional ecology. And it's interesting, in light of this word fudo, Gary Snyder's Dharma name, it was given to him from all his training in Japan, chofu. So the fu in chofu is the same fu as in fudo. Now, listen to these inexpressible qualities that are related to what it is to be here. That your poetry, your way of being, will be the one who does deep listening on what it was to be here, beyond all of the politics and neuroses and grasping that we impose on what it is to be here. And the teacher also said, after he got his Dharma name, Chofu, one who will listen to these things, do not be afraid. That's Zen experience. You realize you're an idiot, you realize you're incompetent, but you're fearless. You go straight into these things. Finally, it would be fair to say that we are no more on this land then we are in time. So what's true of space is true of time. Wei Chong's demand was to tell me where I am now, not to speak of place in general. When we construe the land generally, it becomes a grand being in time, having its birth and death, its coming and going, its duration, which it is whatever it is we say it is. That's, again, going to be another fishnet. The great destroyer of fishnets is time, because it empties being. It is rather the land right now, Nikon, as Dogen insisted, right now, not in general, not over time, now. Rather than the land being itself for the time being, that is, for the duration of itself, it is empty of intrinsic being. It is rather the manifestation of what Dogen memorably called Uji, being time. We are not generally in Cascadia, we are intimately in Cascadia. Each singular moment of Cascadia is Cascadia anew, its differentiation from what it was, and its ongoing coming forth anew. Zen names broadly the practice of entering into the intimate Uji of beings as Buddha ancestors, whose mind we appreciate by appreciating neither information nor a general sense of things, but rather this here, right now. A here whose web extends to all of the great earth and to the furthest extent of the universe, but which is also uniquely this moment, this here and now, and all beings are its practice. What then is it to speak from and toward this where I am now? I think that's, in my understanding, the question of Cascadian Zen. It is here that we encounter the great Buddha ancestors as we find ourselves to be snowflakes on a hot oven stove. But it is also here that we see that poetry does not reduce to the prowess of its forms and the genius of its formal innovations, as great treasures as those are. Here and now, the mind of the poet, of the spiritual interdependence and temporal singularity of Cascadia, manifests anew again and again. So thank you for your attention. We have a few minutes. I won't belabor the point. I know people are tired too. George.
Thank you so much. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more to the idea of reversing the political and the map, where we are starting in the bioregion and then think about the political from our region, and you can think about a politics of nature in which animals, plants also participate. Perhaps I know you just thought Robin Kimmerer's book.
Yes, I love that book.
So she, of course, makes very clear that trees and plants have a lot to tell us, and we should take them into our community, or we should be part of their community rather. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to that, and I know you have a lot to say about that too. So sorry for that.
It's an enormous question, one that I feel a lot of passion about wanting to think about. You can just maybe start indirectly this way, so a negative way and then maybe a more positive direction. What would happen if a forest thought like a capitalist and a single tree made the entire bioregion its slave, and that every single thing in that bioregion became what it was to exalt that one tree? It would collapse instantly. I mean, it would just be a sickness. The good news is that it would collapse quickly. The good news is the earth, part of its great wonder is that it's able to heal itself. The hard thing to be able to really sit and look at is, if we persist on living on the earth will eventually heal itself of us to its betterment. It makes no sense to say save the earth. The earth is in the process of saving itself from us. It does not need any more help. So I mean, in a certain way, we have to think. I mean,
That's
Cascadian.
not reassuring.
We got to start with what things are. Not an anxiety or a fear moment like that. I mean, I think really it's just a call to wake up. I mean, there is a lot of good news in that, as in it is the earth also being our teacher. The positive thing is the trees, the plants, the animals, they're all teaching us. They're all teaching us. And they're all doing a much better job than we are. And occasionally we see, let's say, for example, when the pine beetle overstretches its boundaries, it'll be the whole forest of it will be gone, or a virus will kill all of its hosts. So that's teaching us also. But I would say this: Cascadian Zen is the poetic opening into the thought of mind is not best served by settling upon ourselves as a virus. It's really to think of ourselves more deeply, to study ourselves more deeply. And I would say then, well, I mean, what kind of politics are true of any bioregion on Earth? They're not centrally organized by a fishing net or a bird cage. All of our politics heretofore, not all of them, almost all of them, are just various species of bird nets and fish cages. I think I shouldn't say all of them, because there are lots of marginal examples all over the world. They've just been rendered inaudible as the fish nets take over. Ecologies are, in some very broad and non-chaotic sense, anarchic. The anthropologist of this region said, it was true this was a culture based on nobility, but that meant, really, that to be a person, human or non-human, was a noble thing. It was not a hierarchical thing. That should be the job of a culture, to ennoble what it is to be here, to elevate it, to listen deeply to it, to cherish it. Also, to speak better of it. I mean, I think really, philosophy, I think it's a very good training, but left to itself, it's a dead end. We have to say that it's really true. It's a dead end. I think it's necessary. I really say, you will benefit from a very serious study of philosophy. It'll make you a better person, if it doesn't kill you. You have to read the Dogen. Study is the art of studying to get through studying. Studying to get through studying. We have all kinds of listening. Poetry is attunement, speaking now and here. Living in a non-generalizable world. A sense that a poem itself is not true in a general way. It's not politics or a philosophical theory by other means. It's a different attunement. It's a deep cleansing and awakening of mind. Nadine, you were going to say something?
No, I was just moving. I realized it looked like I was raising my hand, but I'm
It's
just
cool.
so straight.
It's cool. Please, here.
Again, thank you. It's always a pleasure to hear you speak. I mean, this is only the second time, but I really enjoyed that. And I mean, having experience with his work with the polis and ecology, and again, having heard you speak and thinking about it, like, in your words, how does one address the tendency to be apathetic and the urgency of the moment with that Zen ideal of not being attached to, like, again, applying the political to that moment? Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, in a strange sort of way, apathy is one of the great symptoms of our time. I think it's not just an accident. It is one of the operational symptoms that speak to something more profound and more subtle underneath it. So apathy is expressing the same sorts of disease that greed is. So an apathetic person, that's one symptom of the same disease by which, the great vocation of my life is to hoard more money than I can spend. If I succeed in doing, my voice and my opinions will be welcome wherever I go. And all I do is just bring lucre that I've covered in blood. That the least thing in the world I'm interested in is my world. Here's the thing. You don't say I'm apathetic in general. I don't have time. I've got my must-watch TV. I've got my likes on the Facebook or whatever that thing is that people do. I got to do my Twitterings. I don't have time for that stuff. It's too depressing. This is crazy. It's an upside-down world. I simply want to say, going forward, we also need spiritual resources without magic thinking. So that means we take a lot of them off the table, but it also means we're in a position where we can learn from all those that we've been preaching to also. I think that's a big, huge thing. I'm not sure we deserve to learn from them, but I think if we're penitent, maybe we'll learn some things. But there are resources to be able to turn things right side up. But it is also looking at your own mind and saying, I'm a Tripitaka master. And, so what? That's the obvious sickness. So what? I can cite 1,000 sutras. I'm an academic. I know this. My entire day is comprised of people who tell me things like that. Yeah, that's great. And so my takeaway is, obviously you. He was a great master. This is the great story of Dyer is immediately preceded by the story of the Daimon King Chu. And Daimon King Chu has memorized all 300 commentaries on the Daimon Sutra. And he hears that somewhere in the south of China, someone has dared say that he's a better scholar than Daimon Chu. And so he's going after him. That's strange. Why should I want to be, while here is Wirth, the greatest thinker of the climate emergency. That's why we have a climate emergency. We think things like that. I'm happy to be here, and therefore I want to take responsibility for what it was to be here. I'm not indifferent to it. You don't need to value add things. Reality is enough for those who are interested in it. But in that way, also going back to something that Paul Nelson said earlier, the Gnostic value of poetry. It's a deep form of knowing. In a way, its depth is that it's a more intimate form of knowing, and therefore more relevant, more present. In comparison to it, the beauties of science, which have their own form of very kind of formal poetic register, but they're very general. They're very formulaic. No one lives in the world of science. Okay. It's 1:45. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think there was a schedule correction you were
Yes.
to announce.
So, a couple of things. One, there is a mistake on the schedule. We're starting tomorrow at 9, not 9:15. That's my typo. I apologize for that. And then this was the last part of today's program when Shinyi and Paul and I were just going to say welcome, but with no speeches or anything, just to say hello and how happy we are that you're here. So, y'all can come up.
I want to express my appreciation that I know that we have colleagues here from Canada, New York, California, and Pennsylvania, and we recognize that you traveled to be here with us, so thank you for coming and gracing us with your presence. And yes. I also want to express the appreciation for the diversity of thinkers in this room. We have people who are here from the philosophical disciplines and poetry, community building, translation, therapy, and it's just great to be in the room with you.
Paul?
Well said. I agree. Thank you. I'm really humbled to be here and to be part of this. I think it bodes well for a continued Cascadian Zen study with the book and an anthology is being worked on right now. And that's the next step, and perhaps a launch at a Cascadia Poetry Festival in the future. And other events like this. I'm finding this very satisfying, and I'm humbled and very grateful to be here.
I'll just echo the words of my esteemed colleagues, and I myself am just absolutely thrilled to be around such luminous spirits as the people in this room. To me, it's just a dream come true, so thank you for being here and for sharing of yourself with us. A little note on books. Poets write good books. At least good poets write good books. That would be the poets in this room. I have 9 copies remaining of Daphne's collected works, the intertitle. Those are on sale. If you don't have cash, we can also take a credit card. If that's the case, please see Elizabeth Sykes. She's got a little square, so she can take care of that. So I'll have all 9 copies tomorrow. Paul's books are here, and others of you may have books also, so I want to encourage you, if you have access to them, to bring them tomorrow, and I'm sure you'll have many appreciative people who would like to avail themselves of them. So relax tonight, enjoy yourselves, and we'll see you all at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Thank you.